Yo bar, what's up and what's happening? And today I'm back with the whiteboard. And what I want to talk to you about today is calories, energy expenditure, and how to understand your macronutrients better to help you successfully lose weight. So the question that I always get asked is a calorie just a calorie? And the short answer is yes, a calorie is just a calorie. But the real question that you want to be asking yourself is, where am I getting that calorie from? But before I go into that, I want to give you a really detailed breakdown of energy expenditure and how your body chooses to use energy. So guys, the largest amount of energy expenditure that your body uses every single day comes from your BMR or your RMR. Your BMR is your basal metabolic rate, and that basically means that the lowest amount of calories that you can afford to have just to stay alive, your basal metabolic rate. Your RMR is different. It's your resting metabolic rate. And that's probably more precise as to how many calories you're actually burning per day just by being you. Now, what you might be surprised is that it's the largest amount of calorie expenditure per day that comes out of your calorie consumption. The amount of calories that you need to consume per day are vastly taken up by just your body. So that's basically brain function, heart function, any organ function, that all takes energy. And actually, that is the largest amount of energy that you'll expend per day. What's important to understand about the BMR or your RMR is that if you undercut just those calories per day, your body definitely will not lose weight. Your body might lose weight if you have an extreme deficit of calories. So let's say you drop down to something ridiculous like 1,000 calories per day and your BMR is something like 1,500 calories per day. Your body will lose weight, but it's more than likely that it will most probably be muscle tissue and not body fat, which is visceral or subcutaneous fat. That's the type of fat that we would be looking to burn. We definitely wouldn't be looking to lose overall weight, which will more than likely be muscle tissue if you undercut your BMR or your RMR too low. So the second highest energy expenditure that your body will go through per day is actually living, social, and work. That's basically anything that you do throughout the day. So if you were to sit on a seat and do nothing for the entire day, that's basically what your BMR or your resting metabolic rate will be, okay? But obviously most people get up and do something per day. They go to work, they have a social life, they have normal living things to do, such as cleaning the house, going shopping. That is all counted within your second highest energy expenditure rate. So quite simply put, if you are more of an active person at work, or if you're more active socially, or you do more things, you're more likely to be burning higher amounts of calories than someone who, let's say, sits behind a desk for long periods of time. If you have to work within an office or on a computer, that's basically going to mean that your calorie expenditure is low. And so that when you're resting, you're more likely to be relying on your basal metabolic rate or your resting metabolic rate. So the more that you do in your social life and your working life, obviously the higher amount of calories you're going to expend per day. Again, it's really important to make sure that you're actually including that within your calorie expenditure. So if you're not having enough calories just to suit your resting metabolic rate, and you're not having enough calories to be able to consider your living, social, and work calorie expenditure, again, you're not going to lose weight. Your body's more likely to burn off muscle tissue than it is burning off subcutaneous or visceral fat, which is the fat inside your body, because you're not having enough calories to be able to do this work and this work. So guys, the third lowest energy expenditure is actually exercise. So that includes anything such as walking, going to the gym, doing classes, anything which you consider exercise where your heart rate and your breath is going up basically means that you are exercising. Now, most people would probably say that exercise outspends living, but actually it doesn't, because if you think about it, if you go to the gym for an hour or you go for a walk for 5 kilometers or whatever, you're basically going to say that, well, we're doing that for a certain period of time and that's a set rate or that's a set distance. But if you think about your social, work and living, if you combine all of those together, you're probably going to be doing that for a much, much longer period of time throughout your day, and your exercise is only probably going to fit into a very small portion. Now, I do see a lot of clients and I do see a lot of people over exercising. So they might be in the gym for long periods of time, doing 90-minute stints in the gym, lifting weights, doing cardiovascular stuff, perhaps doing back-to-back classes. That's absolutely fine. But what that's not going to do is it's not going to burn more body fat. In fact, what's going to be likely is that your body's going to be going through a huge amount of glycogen, which is the sugar which is inside muscle. It's going to be using as much of that as it can. And once it gets to those empty stores, then it will start to use body fat and also muscle tissue. The other thing about it is that the fact is that when you re-eat, when you reconsume food, your body's glycogen stores are going to go back up again. As soon as you eat carbohydrate, that glycogen is going to go back into the muscle tissue, which is what your body should be doing. But what you should realize with this third energy expenditure right here is that you need to understand your energy consumption isn't going to be primarily based on how much you exercise. In fact, exercise is basically the cherry on top of this pie here. The thing is that with exercise, what you need to understand is that it's really there for health and fitness. It's there for you to get stronger. It's there for you to feel better, feel mentally well, such as things like serotonin and dopamine, all of your endorphins and things of that nature. That's what exercise is for. Exercise is to keep you stronger, is to keep your joints mobile, and it's just to keep you generally fitter. It shouldn't be the main thing that you use to lose weight. But this overall pie here is all of the expenditure that it takes for you to lose weight, and considering the macronutrients, which I'll get onto in just a second. The fourth and final chunk of this pie is thermogenesis. And thermogenesis, quite simply, is the burning of food. So when you consume food, it takes an amount of energy for your body to be able to process that food, and that takes energy expenditure. So if I have a 700 calorie steak, which has got fat and protein in it, that 700 calories is not going to be exactly 700 calories. My body's going to have to break down those fat molecules and tear apart that protein fiber, which basically, or the fiber from the muscle tissue of the animal. Basically what that's going to mean is that there's going to be an energy expenditure to require or obtain that energy, and that is thermogenesis. And so there is a very small portion, probably smaller than what I've drawn there, but there's a very small portion of calorie expenditure per day just by consuming food. Again, that goes back to when you're looking at things such as highly processed foods, which have got vegetable oil and refined sugars in. What you're looking at is the fact that you're making it easier for you to digest food. If you're having food which has been refined or processed, it's much, much easier for you to digest. And therefore, because it's easier for you to digest, it's not so hard work on the body. So your energy expenditure rate actually goes down. If you're going to eat 5 donuts, those donuts aren't going to be very hard for your body to be able to process because they're already refined. So basically, what that means is that your overall expenditure isn't going to be as high. Therefore, what that means is that if you look at eating food which has got more fiber, and it's basically a more whole food to begin with, it's more of the original food it would have been, and it hasn't been so highly processed, your energy expenditure of thermogenesis is actually going to go up, which is more beneficial for you. So back to the original question. The original question is, are calories just a calorie? Yes, a calorie is just a calorie. If you have a bag of sweets and you have a cabbage, the calories in that cabbage and the calories in those sweets are basically exactly the same thing. Energy is energy. So the carbohydrate inside that cabbage and the carbohydrate or the sugar inside those sweets are the same thing, and your body will burn them. But do they have quality within them? There's going to be more micronutrients within inside the cabbage, such as vitamins and minerals and trace elements and things of that nature that your body can use. Also, the fiber is going to help break down the rate of insulin, in which the amount of carbohydrate in a cabbage would have. But when you're looking at things such as calories inside highly processed foods, such as a bag of sweets, there's obviously no fiber. There's no minerals, there's no vitamins and things of that nature. And also the amount of carbohydrate, sugar inside a bag of sweets is, I don't know, 10, 15 times the amount that you'd find in a cabbage. Also, to eat a whole cabbage would be almost impossible, I'd have thought. But nonetheless, the volume of calories inside a bag of sweets is where we start to see things unravel. That's where we start to see things such as weight in the body or on the body becoming much more of a greater problem for individuals, and that's what we need to understand. So what I'm going to do for you now, guys, is I'm going to break down calories as energy, and we're going to look at fats, proteins, carbs as all individual macronutrients and what you need to look out for, what you need to consider when you're eating these macronutrients, and how you can combine them together to make much better meals, but also to be able to think about what you choose when you go to buy your food. And that will lead to successful weight loss for you, and it will also help with your pie. So let's look at the macronutrient fat. What does fat do for you? Understanding fat better and how you can improve your fat consumption right now. So guys, when it comes to fat, I'd like to talk about two different types of fat. The first is the fat that you consume, and that is basically saturated and unsaturated fat. But actually, I don't want to talk about its saturates, so I want to talk about its type and where it comes from. So a lot of people, or a lot of clients that I work with, and a lot of people in general, have a really confused or misconception around fat and animal fat. A lot of people think that animal fat is purely just saturated fat, and that's not completely true. When you're looking at animal meat, the fat from that is actually a natural source of fat. Now, if you go to something like a vegetable oil, such as a rapeseed oil or possibly a sunflower oil, that isn't really a natural form of fat. And the reason why is because it's obviously been through a process where we've had to gain or get the oil from that seed. And the problem with that is because we don't actually obtain fat naturally through that process, it makes us wonder, is it actually good for us in the first place? Let's just hone in on that for a second. The fat that you cook your food in is really important to make sure that you're getting the right type of fat. Now, years and years ago, we used to cook with things like butter and lard, but now we very much cook with fats that are from vegetables or seeds, such as like a rapeseed oil or a sunflower seed. Think about it for a second. There is no natural way to be able to consume vegetable or seed oil in these vast quantities. The oil that you cook with, such as rapeseed oil, for example, hasn't actually got to you via a natural process. It's been processed by agriculture. And so therefore, it's not a natural way to be able to consume the fat that we do need. But when you look at animal fat and any fat that you find within animals, whether it be fatty fish or fatty meat, it's a lot more natural. Now, when we look at seed oil, such as rapeseed oil, it has been marketed to us very well. It's been marketed to us that it's healthier to eat the oil from a seed rather than eating the fat from an animal. But there's a slight problem with that. And the problem is that the molecule inside vegetable oils or seed oils oxidizes very fast. And so that isn't good for you. That basically means that it breaks down at a hell of a rate. So what is oxidization? Oxidization is basically when you look at a piece of metal and it has rust on it. The rust is reacting with the oxygen within the atmosphere, and that is basically oxidization. And it's exactly the same thing. It's a breakdown that's happening within your body when you're consuming those types of oils. So if I were you, what I would look at doing is turning to things such as butter, coconut oil, or perhaps even sometimes using a little bit of lard or natural animal fat, because they don't break down the same way as the oil from a seed does. So when you look at animal fats, there are a lot more natural source of fat. When you look at an egg, or you look at steak, or you look at salmon, but the fat that's within those meats are naturally found. And also the molecules within those fats react differently. What's happened is that we have been marketed vegetable and seed oil because it sounds healthier. It sounds like it's much better for us, but actually it isn't that good for us. And that's because of the molecule that oxidizes within the body. So guys, the second type of fat is the fat that's stored around your body. And they come in two different types. They are subcutaneous fat, which is the fat that's stored around your body. And then you have visceral fat, which is the fat that's stored within the body. Subcutaneous fat is basically fat cells that are around things such as the abdomen. So when you see someone who's got a little bit of a belly, that basically means that they are storing fat around their abdomen. When you're looking at visceral fat, that's fat that is stored within the organs. So basically your body puts fat where it can, and if the human or the person starts to consume more calories than it actually needs, it's more likely that the visceral fat will start to go up as well as the subcutaneous fat. Now, the strange thing about subcutaneous fat is we basically only have a limit as to how much we can actually store. So we have a storage facility where we hold fat, and basically that's actually quite a healthy thing. If your body has just got a layer of subcutaneous fat around it, but your visceral fat is actually quite low, we would consider you to be relatively healthy. It just basically means that your body is storing more energy than is needed. Now, it's not necessarily a beach body, but it is still a healthy body. So if visceral fat becomes too high, that basically means that the organs are working a lot harder than they should be. And if we look at the pancreas is the organ that makes the hormone insulin. So inside your pancreas are these cells called beta cells, and those beta cells basically at some point get turned into insulin, and then your pancreas releases insulin, and insulin is there to be able to control the macronutrients that you consume for your food. So when you eat food, your brain basically produces or requires the amount of insulin that is needed so that the right macronutrients from the food that you eat, which is proteins, fats and carbs, gets delivered to the right places in a very basic sense. But if the pancreas becomes too fatty, which is the visceral fat, and that fat gets too high, what happens is it's putting too much stress on the pancreas, and it's not able, the beta cells aren't able to make insulin as well. And also what happens is that because the pancreas now demands more insulin in itself to be able to store the visceral fat around the organ, things start to become not very good for the individual. So what we always need to make sure is that there are differences between subcutaneous fat and visceral fat. If you've got subcutaneous fat, which is basically belly fat, you need to make sure that it doesn't get too high, because it's going to mean that the more subcutaneous fat you start to store, the levels of visceral fat are also going to start to go up as well. Now, the only way that you can really read your visceral fat is by going on like a biometric scale. You can find them in gyms, you can find them in health centers, you can find them in different clinics. But basically, you want to be able to measure or make sure that your weight doesn't go too much over the amount that you need for someone of your height, age and sex. When you're looking at people who have got type 2 diabetes, they are individuals who've got too much visceral fat around their organs, and they've got too much visceral fat around their pancreas. Now, because of their lifestyle, because they're probably people who have more highly processed types of foods, that's going to mean that their pancreas is working harder to create insulin, but it's finding it harder to be able to create the insulin because the fact that the pancreas has got more fat around it or within it. So that basically means that those little beta cells that go to making insulin aren't being created either quickly enough or correctly, or the right dosages of insulin aren't being controlled by the body. This basically means that the blood sugar levels within that individual are starting to go awry, and from that basically means that their diabetes starts to become a problem. So to sum up, guys, when you're looking at visceral fat and you're looking at subcutaneous fat, you want to make sure that both of those remain relatively even, but you want to make sure that your visceral fat is as low as it can be, and you want to make sure that your subcutaneous fat is as low as it can be. And those things can obviously be achieved through a good diet and a healthy lifestyle. So guys, let's turn and look at proteins. What are proteins for? What do they do for you? How you can improve your protein consumption and how that's going to help you lose weight. So guys, protein. Protein is one of those macronutrients which is quite hard to attain for individuals. Some of that is because of the lifestyle that people choose to live, and also some of that is because of their diet. So if there's someone who's a vegetarian, it's hard to get natural sources of protein in because they tend to not eat anything which is from an animal. They might eat eggs, they might eat cheese, they might drink milk, which is great, and you can make up enough protein just through those types of foods. But it is harder compared to someone who eats meat products. Now, the problem with protein is that I have always felt, and when I've been working with people who are either looking to lose weight or they're diabetic, their protein intake is always really, really low. And actually, if you look at the RDA, which is the recommended daily allowance, the RDA is about 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight per day. But that's the RDA. That's basically the lowest amount of protein that you should be having per day to stay alive. But we want to do more than just stay alive. We want to be able to be fit, well, and prosper. When I'm looking to suggest amounts of protein to people, I like to try and keep it nice and simple for them. Basically, what I would say is anywhere between 1.5 and 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. And that basically means that all they have to do in their head is the maths. So if someone weighs 80 kilos, then they will roughly need about 160 grams of protein per day. And 160 grams of protein will be quite difficult for some people. And again, that goes to show that they're not getting enough in their diet because it's so hard for them to get into their diet. And most people say, I can't eat all that meat, I can't eat all that fish. But there are other ways to get protein, such as you can have things such as protein supplements. And also, a lot of people don't add that much protein into their meals. If you look at your breakfast, a lot of people actually skip a high amount of protein opportunity, I feel, to be able to add protein into your breakfast. Most people tend to have things like cereal or toast, but those things are carbohydrates. They have got no protein in them. So if you can look at having something like a protein shake, a smoothie, perhaps some eggs, perhaps some smoked salmon, then that actually will up the amount of protein that you need per day. Obviously, they're things that you need to enjoy and that you need to like, but I do feel that when you're looking at meals, actually people don't eat as much protein as they think they do. Again, if you're an 80 kilo individual and you need to be able to consume 2 grams of protein per day, that basically means that you need 160 grams per day. But that also needs to fit into the fact that if you're an active individual and you're 80 kilos, then you probably need 2 grams, if not more. So again, it's very important that you find as much protein as you can within your meals, and perhaps you use something like a tracking app such as MyFitnessPal and track yourself for a few days in the meals that you do choose to eat and see how much protein that you consume within those meals and see if there's any way that you can up the amount of protein that you need. One more thing about protein, guys, is that any study that has ever been done on weight loss has always shown that the more the individual consumes a higher amount of protein, the lower the overall body weight and the lower the overall fat on that individual, whether it's man or woman. And also, it goes to show that the more active the individual is, the more that individual will also consume protein as well. So protein is a macronutrient that needs to be considered a little bit more in your diet when you're trying to lose weight successfully. So guys, the last one, carbohydrates. What I want you to basically understand is the differences between complex carbohydrate and simple sugars and where you fit in within that. And if you change just a few simple things, how that's also going to help you to lose weight and live longer. So guys, the last macronutrient that we want to look at is carbohydrate. Carbohydrate is definitely one of the macronutrients that gets a lot of press. It gets a lot of good press and it gets a lot of bad press. In recent years, A lot of carbohydrate press has been around diets such as the keto diet and things of that nature. And they're basically saying, oh, all processed sugars are really bad for you and this, that, and the other. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But what I would say is that people kind of start to miss the point. When you're looking at sugar on its own, is sugar bad for you? In high quantities, anything is bad for you. If I gave someone a diet which was made of just fruit, then they would most likely put on quite a lot of weight, because the fructose, which is found in fruit, will start to amount and start to get stored as body fat. Okay, so do I feel that sugar is bad for you? In small portions, no. It's probably more likely to be a part of your diet than it's not. What is bad for you is when you eat highly processed foods, such as when you go to buy a packet of something or a bag of something. They're gonna have more highly refined sugars, those processed foods, and they're also gonna have more highly refined oils, such as vegetable oil. And they're the things that are going to amount to a portion of food that, when consumed, you're having more calories than you actually need. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take something as simple as a chocolate bar. A chocolate bar is going to be a highly condensed amount of sugar and fat in one item of food. And so when it's consumed, you're consuming huge amounts of sugar, huge amounts of fat, and probably processed fat. And you're also having a high amount of calories. And that's the thing. When you're having something of that nature, it's not very satisfying. So the likelihood of you wanting to have more, especially since you've had sugar, the likelihood of you wanting to have more is going to be much, much higher. And therefore, you're going to start to eat more and consume more. And because sugar is something which can become addictive, it basically means that you're going to start to look for things that are sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. And so therefore, you're going to start to choose foods that have got this very condensed amount of calories, which have got high amounts of processed sugar, high amounts of processed fat. And again, that's going to add to the overall calorie intake per day. So it doesn't take a genius to work out that when you're consuming these types of foods, you're over consuming on your calorie needs per day. And that is what's going to make you fat. The other thing we need to understand about carbohydrates is that whether your carbohydrate is coming from a bag of sweets or it's coming from a vegetable, they all go to make the same thing. So your body converts all sugars or carbohydrates into glycogen, okay? And the glycogen is stored within the muscle tissue. But once the stores are full, and that is going to then get converted into either visceral or subcutaneous fat, depending on the overall weight of the individual. So when we're looking at how we store glycogen, there is stored in two places. It's stored in muscle tissue and it's stored in the liver. And they go to say that roughly the average human can store around about 200 grams of glycogen at any given time. Okay, so when you go to the gym and you exercise hard and you run on the treadmill and you go on the rowing machine, you have a really good workout. Yes, you've depleted your glycogen stores. But as soon as you eat anything which is a carbohydrate, you're going to basically resupply the glycogen in the stores, so you're going to fill them back up again. So because we know that the body stores glycogen in the muscle and in the liver, we basically then need to start thinking about how we're going to consume our carbohydrate. So when we're looking at processed foods such as a chocolate bar, which has got huge amounts of carbohydrate or sugar in it, not only is it easy to digest and process, which means it's going to send your insulin sky high, it also is going to mean that it's more likely to get stored as fat because your body's trying to do something with it. And if you've got your glycogen stores within your muscle tissue and then within your liver at the max capacity, that basically then is going to then go into overflow, which basically means that energy gets stored as fat. So what we need to start to consider, how are we going to get the carbohydrate that we need per day to be able to be functional and feel okay, but also not overconsume on the amount we need. So if your body is a vessel that can store up to 200 grams worth of glycogen, which comes from the carbohydrate food that you eat, whether that's from a bag of sweets or from fruit and vegetables. How do we lose body fat? Well, your body also uses a different form of energy called a ketogen. And ketogen, or ketosis, comes from the breakdown of fat tissue via function of the liver back into the body and gets used when glycogen isn't as present. Now, when you're having a very normal day-to-day diet and a day-to-day routine, there are always going to be ketogens within the blood. But when the body starts to run out of glycogen stores or glycogen isn't as present, the body will start to call upon body fat to use as energy. And that basically means that the body wants to create more ketogens to keep the body running. Now, there have been plenty of studies to show that an individual can actually live off its own ketogens as long as the calorie intake matches the requirements that is needed per day. What that basically means is, in layman terms, that you as an individual can actually eat a lower amount of carbohydrates as long as you make sure that you're having a higher fat and protein intake per day to be able to substitute the lack of carbohydrates in the body. What that's going to then do is that's going to start to call upon the amount of body fat to be turned into ketogens, and slowly over time you're going to start to notice that you're going to lose extra weight because your body is using that energy, because the amount of carbohydrate that you used to consume isn't the same as what it used to be. So what would I recommend? I recommend for most people to consume anywhere between 80 to 120 grams of carbohydrate per day. Now, again, if you go back onto an app, a tracking app such as MyFitnessPal, and you do a day's worth of tracking, I probably would think that most people's carbohydrate intake is much, much higher than that. So let's say for a second that you're an individual who consumes roughly about 200 grams of carbohydrate per day, and I'm asking you to get it down all the way to 120 grams per day. It's going to be a little bit difficult. So what I suggest you do is you start to slowly but surely drop off the amount of carbohydrate that you don't need in your diet and start to replace it with healthier forms of fat and healthier forms of protein, and start to look at how you're going to change your eating habits within your lifestyle. And that's basically how you're going to successfully lose weight over a long period of time. So you might have heard of someone talk about complex carbohydrates and simple carbohydrates. What's the difference? Really, really easy. The complex carbohydrates are basically natural forms of carbohydrate. So when you're looking at fruit, when you're looking at a vegetable, or if you're looking at something like grains or beans or lentils, anything like that, they mainly tend to be natural forms of carbohydrate. They have fiber in them and they have possibly some fat in them as well. And they'll also have some natural forms of protein in them. And that basically means that they're more complicated, or they're more complex for the body to break down. So it takes much, much longer for the body to be able to obtain the amount of carbohydrate or glycogen within those types of foods. When you're looking at simple sugars or simple carbohydrates, you're looking at things that doesn't take a lot for the body to be able to break down. So a bag of sweets is a really good example. A chocolate bar, a bag of crisps, a donut, a pizza, the list goes on and on. Anything that's been refined and reduced is much, much easier for the body to break down. Therefore, it doesn't have to work as hard. But when we're looking at processed foods, they often don't have much quality to them. And what do I mean by that? Well, there isn't that much vitamins in them. There isn't many minerals in them. And there's also huge amounts of fat and huge amounts of sugar. And basically what that means is that there is a vast amount of calories within a small product, such as something like a snack like a chocolate bar or a bag of crisps. So what we want to do is start to get rid of that processed food, because there's no quality in it, and we want to start to be able to find our more complex carbohydrates from more natural sources of food. And again, just by doing that, even if you do it by 10 or 20% within your overall diet, you will over time start to see your body weight come down, because your body will start to work harder in trying to find that carbohydrate rather than being given it instantaneously in something as simple as a sweet treat or just refined food. So the takeaway message for carbohydrate, guys, is that you need to check the amount of processed food that you eat and lower that. You also need to look at the amount of fruit and vegetables that you consume and possibly up them, but you probably want to look at things such as vegetables more because they actually have less carbohydrate in them than they do fruit, because fruit tends to hold quite a lot of fructose. But we're not going to cut fruit out of the equation as such. What we also want to do is we want to look at having more protein and more fat, which will allow the body to burn more body fat, turn it back into a ketogen, and allow that to be used as a form of energy rather than constantly having to use glycogen, which comes from the carbohydrate that you eat. So guys, is a calorie just a calorie? Perhaps not. When you look at your body's energy expenditure and you start to look at the breakdown between fats, proteins and carbohydrates, and also you start to understand that calories are a form of energy, then that should lead to a better version of you, help you lose weight, be fitter, and just generally be well. So guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe to help grow this channel and also to help the YT algorithm. Drop a comment below and I will get back to you. Be fit, be healthy, and of course, be a boss bar.
It's the Yo Bossy Weeks.